So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark. I'm the Managing Director here at TMSDI, and that has been the case for, I've been here for 18 years this year. My job today is going to be acting as co-host, but particularly as producer. So after I hand over to Gary, I'm going to be in the Slack channels, following the conversations, answering any questions that might come up, parking any questions that Gary might want to answer. So if you do want to share any thoughts, queries, concerns, fears as we go through, do feel free to pop those into the chat, and I'll be there typing away. But if you want to chat with any of your colleagues, you'll be able to do that there too. So a very warm welcome to our very special guest, Gary. So I was actually going back through our records today. Now Gary and I kind of reconnected some years ago, but we initially met, I don't know if you know this, Gary, how many years it was? In 2002. Yeah, 20 years ago, you were accredited to use the management profile. So we have known each other for a fair while, but I mean, I've sort of come to know Gary as a very influential voice in the HR and L&D arena. I've seen him delivering keynote speeches, sort of Ignite talks, and certainly has become recognised as a real expert in all things online and virtual delivery. I also noticed that he was also voted as one of HR's most influential movers and shakers just a couple of years ago. And as we'll see, is soon to be published around this particular topic, around hybrid working. So a very warm welcome, Gary. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark. 2002, was it? Did we both have hair then? It seems that long ago that it might well be the case. But thank you. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us on this session today. This is the title that Mark and I came up with, Hybrid Working, What are the Implications for L&D? It's not the sexiest of titles, if I'm perfectly honest. So I've repurposed it, Mark. I hope you don't mind. This is what we're going to call it, School's Out. Why are we here? What are we going to be covering today? Well, the move to greater remote and now hybrid working, as you know, has had a transformational effect on L&D. But it wasn't always a smooth or a straightforward one. And many organizations felt it was rushed and not immediately effective either. There were lots of challenges. Now, though, as we enter what could be a much more organized transition towards a hybrid working environment, we can consider why remote learning, whether that's in a live virtual setting or asynchronous on or offline experiences, is necessary for all of our organizations in the future. So in this discussion, what we're going to look at is how we review the skill set and mindset of those designing and delivering such things, as there are distinct differences that make the learner experience unique, and simply replicating the face-to-face experience can be a mistake. We're also going to look at the hybrid approach to learning, where learners are participating in synchronous activities whilst based in different locations, where the facilitator might have learners present with them in the physical training room as well as online. Now, those types of events carry some risks, and we need to consider the learner experience very carefully. So we'll be doing that today. And then we'll finish off today by talking about the cultural shift that's needed to reposition, repurpose learning for a modern hybrid working environment. Learning is needed more than ever. Now, I'm sure you understand that already, but for remote and hybrid workers, the most common form of learning is not going to be the live session, whether that's virtual or not. We've got to recognize this and shift the culture accordingly. A little bit more about me in case you've not come across me. Feel free to stalk me on social media. These are the kinds of images you see about my life. I'm a father of 4, husband of 1, and in whatever spare time I get, which doesn't seem to be much nowadays, I run my own business. And my business is all about helping people to improve in the workplace, helping organizations to improve what they do. But I've got 20 years experience working at director level in the public, private and voluntary sector in HR and L&D roles all around the northwest of the UK. And I've been working in a hybrid way now for well over 20 years. It isn't something that came to anybody just when the pandemic started 2 years ago. It's something that I've been doing for a long, long time. And I'm going to share some of my experiences today with you and tell you some of the ways in which I might be able to help you. Let's just cover the logistics before we get into the main content. We started bang on 9:30 as we said we would. The prescribed end time is 11 o'clock. And we're not going to go beyond that. We might finish a little bit earlier than that. And the big variable in that is you. If you want to be very, very chatty today, and feel free, by the way, we might push up very close to 11 o'clock. We'll not go past it though. But if you want to sit there with some of those blank looks on your faces, well, we might not. So you're the variable on that one. But it's going to be a very participative session. I'm expecting lots of questions. I'm expecting lots of reactions, observations and comments coming through. Let me tell you how I'm expecting those to come through. Firstly, I want you to be able to use chat. Now, if you haven't used chat already this morning, please locate the chat panel, which should be at the bottom right of your screen, or there is a button that you can use at the bottom of your screen to toggle it off and on. Make sure it's on. Make sure you're set to send to everyone, please. And can you please tell us 2 things if you haven't already? Number 1, where are you in the world? And number 2, what's the weather like out of your window? Some of you have answered this already, but please do that, because that'll reassure me on 2 levels, that you can hear me and that you can find chat as well. So I can see people starting to do that as well. I'm in the middle of Cheshire in the UK today, and it's a grey day, but it's actually kind of warm today. It feels like we might not really need the heating on a little bit later on. So it's a nice day. And like Mark said earlier on, feels like spring is coming. Thank you for those people who are letting me know where you're from in chat. Nice global audience today, which is nice. And it seems to be a better day than many have had in the last couple of weeks anyway, in terms of the weather. So that's what we're going to be using chat for. Please use chat as much as you like today to talk to me, to talk to Mark, to talk to each other, to ask and to answer questions, and to help each other with particular things. So use chat as much as you like. You'll also find your reactions menu towards the bottom of your screen. And the only one there that we're regularly going to ask you to use is the raise hand function. You've got control, by the way, over your microphone and your camera. Let's talk about microphones first. To avoid all the background noise coming through and all the chaos of everybody talking at once and not knowing who's going to open the microphone, we're going to do something very, very British, and we're going to take turns to speak. So if you're ready to take your turn, if you want to open your microphone, please use the raise hand function to let us know. And if I see your hand pop up, or if Mark does, we're going to be coming to you and saying, yes, Jane Smith, please open your microphone. So that's what we're going to be doing in terms of interactions. So you're in control of your microphone. Cameras, by the way, I've got mine on. It's entirely up to you whether you have yours on. You're an adult. You should be allowed to choose whether you have your camera on or not. Now, what are the variables in this? You might want to look at people's faces. You might want to look at their backgrounds, but the learning is not there. The learning is not in anybody else's background either. The learning is in the slides and the things we do as we move through the session, the interactions we have. So if you want to focus on those things, feel free to turn your camera on or off, up to you. If you've spent a lot of time, like I have, doing your hair and your makeup, then you might want people to see that and the effort you've gone to, in which case put your camera on. But it really doesn't matter to how the session goes. We're going to be using breakout rooms though today, at least 1, maybe 2. And in those, it's always worth putting your camera on in a breakout room, because there's less people in the breakout rooms. There is no chat to you look at. There are no slides to look at. There's only other people. So in breakout rooms, I would recommend that you put your cameras on and open your microphones. But in the main room, feel free to do whatever it is that you want to do. So why am I here, by the way? Mark mentioned that there is a bit of an elephant in the room. There is indeed a bit of an elephant in the room. If you weren't already aware, I have written a book. And the book's not out yet, but it will be soon, 3rd of June. You can see some of the details on it there. You can see what it's called. It's all about how we redesign people practices for a modern hybrid working environment. It encompasses HR, L&D, and OD, and all things in between too. And I'm going to share some of the thinking, some of the research from some parts of my book as we go through today, and it might well convince you to buy a copy. It's available to pre-order now, and if you speak to me separately on social media, send me a private message on social media, I can get you a little bit of discount off the cover price. And if you do feel so minded as to buy the book, then I'd love to talk to you as you're reading it. Let me know you've bought it, send me a picture to show that, and I can talk to you as you're reading it. We can have a conversation about some of the things in it. I can answer your questions and make reading the book quite an interactive experience as well. That's what I hope. Now, if you're not already sick of me mentioning the book, you might be by 11 o'clock, and you certainly will be by the 3rd of June, but that's a risk that I am willing to take. Let's start now with the main content. Thank you for some of the comments coming through in chat, by the way. I'll try as much as I can to react to as many of those as I can, but I'm conscious there's quite a lot, but I'll try my best. So there's a challenge for us. Lots of organizations pre-pandemic had been progressing along the journey towards virtual and remote learning already, but it had been slow progress. I've seen it being described as glacial progress. It took the enforced lockdowns to accelerate that change and to bring about new ways of working. But it wasn't a smooth transition for everybody. It was rushed. And in that rushed transformation, lots of people learned lots of lessons about how to design and deliver virtual content. And it highlighted for many people cultural issues, I think, that also need addressing if we're going to make sure that remote and hybrid learning is effective for everyone. Now, Fosway examined the impact of the pandemic on L&D. They highlighted that nearly 2/3 of organisations felt that their adoption of virtual learning was immature and rushed and difficult. But despite this, 82% felt that they were going to do more of it in the future. Cindy Hugger, in her State of Virtual Training report in 2020, noted that it came with 4 main challenges, which she listed in order. Number 1, technological challenges. Number 2, unengaged participants. Number 3, not enough resources. And number 4, unskilled facilitators. Now, as with many organisational changes, the right starting point is to ask why. But we know why virtual L&D took off in 2020. But if it's something that's going to be a default option in the future for all our remote and hybrid workers, and it might well be, I think we've got to answer that why question again. Many organizations, and we'll look at some of these today, are already adopting a virtual first or a virtual by default approach to L&D. Not just for those who are working remotely, but for their entire workforce. To do that effectively, they've got to consider why the learning is needed in the first place, why the organization wants to do it virtually, and why those who are coming would actually want to do so. There is, of course, a place for all forms of learning. The CIPD points out in their report on the impact of the pandemic on L&D that a blended approach is going to provide more of what individual learners need: high quality in-person interventions with lots of social interaction, but supported by well-designed and delivered virtual learning and a range of on and offline self-guided materials. But we have to do things differently. We can't just replicate the face-to-face learning experience. That seemed to take a lot of people by surprise when they were forced to do it. Now, I class myself, maybe wrongly, as quite an experienced virtual facilitator. I've been delivering live virtual sessions for a long, long time before it became something that everybody had to do. And after a few months of me doing it, in the middle of 2020, I started noticing bits of feedback that I'd get from my clients after delivering my sessions. They point out they enjoyed them because they were interactive. We used a lot of tools, that the visuals were better and the delivery was okay. That it didn't seem like my stuff had just been lifted and shifted from face-to-face content. And maybe because I seemed human and not robotic in my delivery. There was one person who even came to my session and said I came across as sexy, but that person was my wife, and I think she might be a little bit biased. That made me realize, though, that the delivery of this type of stuff, it's a very different skill set, as I'm sure many of you appreciate, and a different one than the one I'd started out with 20 years ago when I first met Mark. The evolution of my skill set happened without me even realizing, but clearly many were now struggling with this, and they were falling into some common traps and not creating the most engaging or effective live session. Put simply, people were trying to do what they'd always done face to face, and it's not quite as simple as that. Now, it must be said that delivering this type of session is not for everybody. Lots of L&D professionals, lots of them, are brilliant at designing, delivering face-to-face, in-person training. And they're awesome at it. They always have been, they always will be. But to succeed in this space, in the virtual space, you don't just need to know how to do it. You actually need to be able to enjoy doing it as well. And that's a big difference. It's not going away, this type of learning. It has had teething trouble. So many organizations, I can see people discussing that in the chat as well, some of the issues that you're wrestling with, but it's here to stay. It's likely to grow. And it's not just because we're still in a global pandemic or because it's cheap or because you can record it. It's been shown in research to be at least as effective as face-to-face learning, but only if done in the right way. But what is that right way? We'll try and explore some of this now. So much depends on context. Context is, as usual, king. Why the virtual learning is taking place and what it's intended to achieve. But simply replicating the face-to-face experience for those working remotely using technology is not giving anybody the best experience. It isn't using the skills that we as facilitators need to use. It isn't paying due respect to what the technology itself could bring us. So let's focus this. I can see the discussion already going on, but let's ask a couple of questions for you. What are the good practice principles that you can share here in chat, please, that apply to live virtual sessions? What are the things that you think make a live virtual session stand out as being really effective? Show us a couple of your thoughts coming through. I knew Joe would have some. Thank you, Joe. I'm probably going to have to stop you because I bet you've probably got hundreds, I imagine. But Joe, thank you for some of these, and thank you, Jane, as well, and a few other people. So what some of the things I think, by the way, and feel free to keep throwing these things into chat as we go through and react to some of the things that I think are important. I mentioned before that blended approach, didn't I? Blended approach. Well, I always consider live virtual sessions to be a piece of a part completed jigsaw puzzle. And that means there's going to be asynchronous learning taking place before that live session and asynchronous learning taking place after it as well. And that's going to take different shapes and forms because the context matters there. But the point I'm making is the live virtual session is not a standalone activity, and those designing and delivering it need to be able to fit their piece of the jigsaw into the other existing jigsaw pieces. They also need to be able to signpost people to where and when other pieces of the jigsaw are going to be found. So in essence, what the facilitator is doing is showing the learners the picture on the front of the jigsaw box, giving them that big picture as well as a piece of the jigsaw. I think we also need to spend proportionately longer on the design phase of things like this. Design needs to be more conscious, more deliberate, because you've got to think about the tools, you've got to think about the activities, the way you want to interact with people, and it needs planning much more in advance than it ever did face-to-face. In contrast, though, I find the delivery is often a little bit quicker. And the main reason for that is learners can complete simultaneous activities using things like chat, like you are as well. Whereas in the face-to-face classroom, they'd have to take turns to speak. We also need to make sure people are engaged from the moment they arrive, and we keep these sessions as short as we possibly can. So thank you for a few people pointing out things like that. The interactions have got to be meaningful as well, haven't they? Not just token use of polls, not just token use of closed questions. They've got to be engaged frequently through a session. Now, going back to the webcam point that I made earlier, a few other people reacted to as well, I think we need to avoid insisting on webcam use. People are adults, they should be able to choose. But if you insist on webcam use, it is replicating the face-to-face experience. It can end up being the only way you check people's presence in the live session. I think we need to use it like all of the other tools in the web conferencing platform, like something we use when it adds value, and we don't use it when it doesn't. And it doesn't tend to add value throughout the entire session. There are parts where it does, definitely, so use it then, but there are parts when it doesn't. If you use it through the whole session, it becomes the focal point of the session, and it hinders the use of all the other tools, and it provides lots of distractions. So we've got to use all the tools we've got in this environment to create the right type of engagement. That could be breakout rooms, chat, whiteboards, polls, third-party apps, cameras and microphones, all at the right time. Thank you, Joe, for sharing some of that research as well, which actually is really helpful research, and I've drawn on some of that myself, so thank you for that. We also need to think about the platform as well, don't we? Because all these platforms, they are not created equal And they're all designed for uses that might not match what you want to use it for. So sometimes the platform itself might be a barrier. Some platforms were designed for video-based communication, and they are awesome at that, but they're not great at delivering live learning events. So you might need to supplement them with some third-party apps. And some platforms were designed for stuff like this, but they aren't great at video-based communication. So when you're looking for a platform in your organization, there are going to be lots of interested parties all wanting to use that platform for slightly different purposes. That means you're going to have to make compromises. And if you do that, you need to ensure you've got a platform not only that you know how to use, but you know how it differs from other platforms and where its limitations are. And you know how to access maybe some third-party apps to bridge some of the gaps. So let's think about your platform then. Platforms that you want to talk about. Do you want to share some of the platforms you're using and what you think about them? How effective are the platforms that you use to deliver things like this? Well, I've got strong views on many, many platforms, and if you follow me on social media, you'll know a little bit about that. But some platforms are better for this type of thing than others, but you may not have a choice. And if you don't have a choice, you need to find workarounds for some of the things that you might need to do. So please share your thoughts on that. And a few people have been talking about Teams and Zoom, and I saw somebody mention Adobe Connect as well. And there's plenty of others too, plenty of others. And some of them are really good at some things and not so good at others. I don't think there's any one platform that is brilliant at everything. And as long as you realize that, you can cope with it. And then you realize, well, it can only take me so far, but I need to find something else to take me the rest of the distance. As Simon points out, none are perfect. It's like competing in a Formula One race. You can do it in any car you like, but you're not going to win the race unless you're in the best vehicle for that particular track. And that's the same with web conferencing platforms. You can use anyone you like, but you might not be able to do it brilliantly unless you upgrade your tech somehow. Okay, so let me have a think about hybrid learning. This is going to lead us into a breakout session in about 5-10 minutes time. What does hybrid mean from a learning perspective? Now, in my book, I don't know whether I've mentioned, but I've wrote one, I talk about hybrid meaning different places where somebody could work. And so far today, I've hinted at hybrid learning being different places, face-to-face, virtual, where people could learn. But as you know, learning is not necessarily such a binary choice, is it? It can happen in lots of different ways and in different places as well. But lots of organizations are beginning to think about how to deliver what they're calling hybrid learning events. And by that, I mean where there are learners in the physical training room and learners who are remote. And the facilitator could be in either one of those places. So let's examine some of the options for this. I always like a nice 4-box model. So here's one that we'll use to try and explain this. These are the 4 options that you have for delivering learning events. And the hybrid ones are the ones that I've highlighted in blue here. Let's start off with the bottom left. This is where the facilitator is based in the physical training room. And with them, there are some learners, but there are also some learners connected in remotely. To me, this is risky. There's a big risk of the facilitator having bias in their behavior towards those who are in the same location as them. And that means for those accessing remotely, it's going to be a difficult experience. So to combat this, what do we do? Well, the physical space, the physical training room needs to have high quality audio, high quality video to connect those who are accessing remotely into the room with a facilitator who might well be moving around the physical training room. So that facilitator's got to have a microphone that will go with them, and the space itself has got to have directional cameras, because if the facilitator moves away, that's not the best experience. The facilitator themselves might need some explicit guidance and help and support to be able to avoid delivering solely to those who are in the room with them. And if they do that, they're not giving those people the best experience. Careful thought as well needs to be given to the tool use, do you think? Physical flip charts, if you have them in the training room, are clearly only going to be available to those who are there. And unless each of those people in the training room has a suitable device, they're not going to be able to access virtual whiteboards and chat functionality. And if you're using cameras to connect those who are using the remote access into the room so that everybody can see their face, well, you've got to have a space to put those cameras. Might be on the wall somewhere, but maybe that wall is also where you're projecting your slides. So have you got the physical space to do it? Maybe if you're not sharing your slides, you turn them off at that particular point if you don't need them, so that the cameras can appear on the wall. And then if you're using breakout rooms, well, how do you do that? Maybe you can subdivide people, the virtual breakout room, the physical breakout room, and these people are going to have to use different tools and feedback in different ways. Or maybe you say everybody's virtual. Now, all this is quite complicated, isn't it? Let's look at the other option then, which many of you will have experienced, where the facilitator is virtual, like I am now, and there's also remote learners, but then there's some others in the training room. Here, the risk is reversed. I might show bias towards those who I can see on my screen here because it's easier to do it. Now, the experience is going to be different for everybody. There might be no way around this unless each learner in the training room is given a device to level that playing field. Now, maybe that's not easy to do. So maybe you have to subdivide the learners based on location and give them slightly different activities. Maybe we can create more inclusive experiences by making sure everybody has got their camera off, everybody, no matter where they are. Because if I can't see everybody in the physical training room, then maybe I shouldn't see anybody at all. Maybe I need to be inclusive that way. And maybe we need to get people using the chat functionality as opposed to having verbal conversations. But that means, again, that the physical training room has got to have first-class audio and video capabilities to make sure that we can do that. Now, this all seems really complicated, do you think? I do. I don't think it needs to be, though. Just as there was a leap for us all delivering this type of session, there is going to be a leap for us all delivering hybrid types of sessions, but we'll get there eventually. With the correct planning and preparation, we'll be able to do it. But I think it might be easier to just avoid hybrid learning completely. Keep it really simple and keep things either entirely face-to-face or entirely virtual. And for some organizations who haven't got the resources, the equipment and the tech to upgrade their facilities, that might be the path of least resistance. Now, I'm going to send you into breakout rooms shortly to get your thoughts on those two blue boxes there. What are your considerations at the moment? What are the things that you're thinking about that might be helpful to share with some other people about hybrid learning sessions where you've got the facilitator either remote or in the room and learners mixed across both things? How do you think it can be done? So the breakout rooms, I'm setting them up in the background as we speak. There's going to be about 5 or 6 people in each one. So I think we've got 3 breakout rooms, and you'll get a chance there as you follow the prompt to take you into the breakout room to open your microphone, and optionally but recommended, put your camera on as you do that and start sharing with people what you think about hybrid learning events. What are the risks? What are the challenges? What maybe do you think can be done about them? Now, you get an opportunity when you're in there to call for help if you have any technical problems, but either Mark or myself will follow you in to those rooms and just check everything is okay, and then we'll leave you to it for about 10 minutes. It'll be really helpful when you come back to share some of your main conclusions about this in the chat panel when we come back. But other than that, the breakout rooms are ready to go. So here we go. Please follow the prompts on screen and I'll see you in 10 minutes. And here they all are again. Welcome back to you all. If you had your camera on in the breakout room, then it will still be on when you come back here. So I'll let you decide whether to leave it on or turn it off. Entirely up to you, but please make sure your microphone is muted unless you particularly want to answer a question, in which case raise your hand. So thank you for all the discussions in the breakout room. I dropped into each one ever so briefly just to check everybody was okay. And there were some really interesting conversations taking place. If you'd like to share some of the conclusions that you got to in your room, then please feel free to throw those into chat. I'd be really interested to see some of the main points that you picked up on in your discussion before we move on into the next bit of the content. So feel free to drop a few things into chat that stood out to you from your breakout rooms today. My view on this is that those two blue boxes, they might be beyond the reach, not just of many facilitators, but many organizations themselves as well. And the path of least resistance might be to stick with the black boxes instead, whichever one seems to be easier for you. So that's my view. Thank you, Joe, for sharing that. So let's think about some other things here. Thank you for sharing some of your thoughts. Heidi, thank you for that as well. Let me share with you a case study that appears in the book. Now, many of you will know the lady who you're about to see on screen here. This is Sarah Duxbury. I spoke to Sarah. She's the Global Senior L&D Manager at All Saints, a UK clothing retail organisation. She features as one of many case studies in my book. Did I mention I've wrote a book? I'm not sure. Anyway, I have. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Sarah talks about in the book and what I talked to her about, because it's relevant to some of the things that we've been talking about here. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, whilst the retail arm of All Saints were all furloughed, anybody else, the central teams, they were working remotely. And Sarah's team began delivering live virtual sessions to those people who were working remotely. And they found them enthusiastically embracing them because, in her view, it gave them an opportunity to talk and connect with people and break up some of the isolation of remote working. And Duxbury feels that this is something that happens far more in live virtual sessions than it ever did or ever can face-to-face. People seem to have a greater human connection and open up more and talk about their personal lives and well-being a lot more. And now she considers this to be a major part of any L&D intervention she makes to the business. Her team realised as well that the content for live virtual sessions had to be really quite good in order to get the engagement. So they partnered with the subject matter experts to design the right content, but didn't let the subject matter experts go off and deliver it without the L&D team giving it that quality assurance check to make sure that the visuals are right, the activities were right. So they were acting as gatekeepers to make sure that the content was in the right place. They also built a very loose structure using internal social media around every particular live session. And they found that all the learners, whether they were remote or face-to-face, they used the internal social media to discuss the learning, to share and curate their own content without any active intervention from the L&D team. So a bit of a cultural shift there. Now, All Saints have very recently returned to entirely in-person working, no remote working anymore. But learning has stayed remote. They've got a virtual by default approach. There's a real appetite for learning created by live virtual sessions that wasn't there when it was all face-to-face. Now, for those who work in the shops and to help them to access the live virtual sessions, they're given blocks of time. And in All Saints, those blocks are full days, because from an operational perspective, that's the easiest way to do it. And it gives the learners focused time for their own development. And they can access the live virtual sessions either in store, because there's enough devices to do it, or they can go home and do it. And these live virtual sessions then, they do last a full day, which for many of you, you probably sat there thinking, a full day. And I thought that too. What Sarah explained to me is it's broken down not just by regular screen breaks and not just by different tool use, but they stop the live session partway through and get people to go off on a walk and talk to people on the telephone. So lots of walking and talking conversations, offline use of things, interspersed by elements of the live virtual session. If you want to know a bit more about what Sarah says her organization is doing, then you might have to buy their book. Let's move on. I started to hint a little bit about the cultural shift there. Thank you, Lisa Marie. I think a lot of people are able to do that. And if you can, it works really well. So remote learning, as we know, getting bigger. Let's talk about some of the cultural shift. The CIPD did a report last year, I think, called Digital Learning in a Post-COVID-19 Economy. And they pointed out that digital learning content was growing. And they said the biggest areas of growth were video content, mobile learning, blended learning, user-generated content, micro-learning, and user-curated content as well. Now, though they lend themselves to hybrid working, don't they? Of course they do. But they're also quite cost effective and they're more easily delivered in the flow of work and at the point of need, which is the main cultural shift we need to think about. Simply investing in more of this type of session, no matter how well designed and how sexy the facilitator is not going to shift the culture in the way we need it to. We've got to use those other bits of digital learning that I mentioned to get that blend of different delivery methods and shift the perception and the appetite for learning, one that everybody can benefit from, whether they're hybrid, face-to-face or remote. But there's a few things we need to consider. One is the role of senior leaders in the organization. From my research in the book, senior leaders seem to be much more willing and able to get involved in live virtual sessions than they ever were for face-to-face. I wonder whether that's backed up by your own experiences. Please tell me. But I think it's critical. It goes beyond mere sponsorship, and other learners then tend to see the active participation of senior leaders and they take a cue from that. So we need to switch on the senior team to remote learning. That's a good start. But we also need to change the way that L&D professionals operate in order to do that. So let's have a think about this. I'm going to send us back into a breakout room shortly to think about how you're changing the culture around L&D in your organization. How are you shifting what L&D professionals do and how other people perceive L&D? The thoughts that you're about to share with people will help other people get their head around it, but will lead us nicely into the remainder of the session where we talk specifically about some of the cultural shift that's needed. So the breakout rooms are going to be, I think, exactly the same as they were before. So you've got a chance to talk to the same people and maybe carry on some of the useful conversations you were already having. Because everything worked technologically wise before, I'll not follow you into the rooms this time, but you can call for help from me or Mark at any point if you're struggling. So the questions for you to think about in your breakout rooms: what are the barriers that you're encountering in changing L&D in your organization? And how are you dealing with that? How are you overcoming that? What are you changing in L&D? So that's the challenge. So same as before, please follow the prompts on the screen. I'll give you 10 minutes for this. Here we go. Okay, and welcome back to you all. It looks like everybody's made it back into the room, has connected up their audio, so welcome back to you all. Quick reminder just to check that you've got your microphone and camera the way you want them to be. But please, if you can turn your microphones off until you're ready to raise your hand and ask a question, but entirely up to you what you do with cameras. So you were talking about the cultural shift and some of the barriers you're encountering and maybe some of the ways in which you're thinking you can overcome them. We're going to talk about some of this anyway, but if you'd like to throw some of your observations into chat, then please do. Throw some of your thoughts in chat. What were the main things that you were thinking about and discussing? And I appreciate, Lisa Marie, yes, it is a bit brutal to be kicked out, but unfortunately we can't let these things go on forever, and it's not easy to try and find a point that all three rooms have naturally come to a conclusion with their conversations. But anyway, throw some of your thoughts into chat, please, about what you think the cultural shift is. And I'm going to help you to focus on a few things here about what it means for us as L&D professionals. We need to be doing far more than just designing and delivering material, far more. If we're going to do our work properly, we need to know about the strategy and the way the business operates. We need to know how it judges performance at different levels. We need to be able to bring people together, whether that's virtually or face-to-face, and help them collaborate to solve performance issues and to maybe curate resources for them that's going to help them solve their own performance issues. We're no longer sage on the stage, the font of all knowledge, or the single source of the truth. We've got to be able to arrange learning in real time for people when they need it. That involves creating video content, audio guides, encouraging coaching conversations, using virtual or augmented reality, and facilitating social learning. So we've got to be comfortable with people learning wherever they might be, and not just when they're in a live session with us. And if we can do that, we start to behave more like the concept of performance consultants, which I'll come on to shortly, and less like trainers, diagnosing performance issues at the source, facilitating solutions that address that in real time. And there are some LXPs, learning experience platforms, that provide you with data about what people do when they're learning, how they learn and how they apply it. Some do that. Now, it's entirely possible that that data and other organizational data that we could get hold of can be used to predict what learning people might need and then deliver it remotely to them. So technology can help us identify learning needs better. The LPI report in their quarterly dashboard that 63% of learning leaders think they have no reliable way to measure people performance, and that 72% feel that the L&D function is not equipped to meet the needs of the business. So those are big stats. And the biggest barrier cited is the time needed to access learning. Now, those kinds of stats, to me, they point to L&D needing to frame our role as something that aids performance, that changes the people's perception about L&D. We need to engage people who are working remotely and in a hybrid way so that learning isn't seen as an interruption to their working day. It's something that they can incorporate into their regular work routines. Now, you might already have been thinking about this. So if you want to share some of your thoughts in chat about changing the way that L&D professionals operate, then please throw that into chat. I can see some people have been picking up on some of the things from the breakout rooms, which is great to see, and that in itself starts to change people's perceptions about L&D. But have you been changing what the L&D professionals themselves do? So if you want to comment on that, please throw those questions into chat. I can see lots of things coming through. I mentioned before about performance intervention. So what do I mean by this? It reminds me a bit more of coaching and supporting performance in a sporting sense. That's where my brain goes when I hear the term. But it's a recurring theme in the annual Mind Tools for Business benchmarking reports. They say that L&D needs to develop ways to support performance at the point of need, and it regularly features towards the top things we need to do. So to me, that positions L&D as a process instead of an event, and that might change people's way they think about it. And we need to be delivering those real-time, just-in-time interventions in the flow of work, and to use technology to help us do that. Now, technology can help us with the provision of information. Things like wearable tech, AI tools can aid knowledge workers, for example, to access information and data to do their job when they need it. And often that's done away from other people and remotely. Knowledge workers, therefore, can rely much more on technology to give them information rather than storing it in their heads. So if your workers can Google the answer to a question, what does that mean for us? Where does that leave us? Well, maybe we can help in other ways. Consider a manager who's having a difficult conversation with a member of staff or planning for one. Here and now, we could deliver a live virtual session or a face-to-face session to help them to prepare for that. And we could do role play, and we could do practical activities that we can see that they've got the skills, and maybe we could give them some real-time feedback. That kind of real-time feedback is cited by the CIPD as the most common way that we can add value to organizations. But can we be there when remote workers need us? If we can't see them all the time, how can we be there? But if this was sport, and we say maybe that the football manager in the technical area or the cricket captain or something is the L&D professional, they can see, they can hear what's going on. They can deliver that in the moment feedback to the people who need it. Now, wearing another hat, I'm a qualified personal trainer. So if after this session you want to talk to me about diet, nutrition, exercise, or you just want somebody to be mean to you on a weekly basis, can do that for you. But the point I'm making about personal trainers, a key aspect of what I do there is observing individuals when they're performing and giving them that real-time feedback to improve their performance there and then. To do that remotely, we have to use technology to do it, to bring us closer to the individual. And that's where augmented reality, wearable tech could really come into its own. That allows us, or maybe an AI version of us in the metaverse, to be able to see or hear what's going on and give the manager instant feedback or ideas. Maybe we are the voice in their head somehow. In an instant, though, that changes what the L&D professional is to becoming much more like a coach, like that football manager coaching from the technical area, or the cricket captain giving interventions on the pitch. We need to use technology to do that kind of stuff. Or maybe we need to help others, the managers themselves, to access that technology. So our skill set changes. We need to be faster, more responsive, and maybe more proactive. We need to use tech and be comfortable providing support on real life, real-time issues. But we have to go at the right pace as well. I've talked about different types of technology here. Some people would be scared by that and be overawed by that. So we mustn't ask too much of any learner. We need to find the path of least resistance, the simplest tools available. The NHS Do OD organizational development guides make this point as well. They say look for light touch systems that people have ready access to, things like their mobile phones, which they're already going to be familiar with and they can more readily use. I wonder what you think of what I've just said there. What are the implications for the L&D professionals in your organization? Have you got people with the right skill set, mindset? Have you got the right tools and equipment and technology to enable you to deliver performance interventions? Please give me some reactions in chat. I can see people have been reacting as I've been talking, but feel free to give me your thoughts on that now. I think many organizations are in a good place. They're already doing this. What I've just been saying is likely to be a challenge for others. So share your thoughts, please, in chat, and I'd be grateful to think about that. Thank you, Lisa Marie, as well. I think the pandemic forced us to do that, didn't it? To be more innovative as well. And you're right, David, as well. Loads of organizations are going to find it near enough impossible, I suspect, David, and beyond their means. But nonetheless, that's the way the wind is blowing. So we've got to find ways to do it without breaking the bank in some way. And that changes the learning philosophy. It's a big shift, isn't it? Now, as Michelle Parry-Slater says in her book, The L&D Handbook, this is a real move to modern learning principles and methods, away from what she calls the injection education of the classroom, one that's focused on learners' needs, giving multiple touch points to help people understand what they're doing and learn from it, one that connects learning to things they already know and do. But it's increasingly what remote and hybrid workers really need. So we need real clarity on what the learning philosophy is. Thank you, Mark, for that. In your organization, everybody in your organization needs to know what technology can and will be used to support learning for remote and hybrid learners. The wider environment needs to be aligned as well. Relationships and connections matter to remote and hybrid workers, much more than they ever did face-to-face. We need to ensure in the L&D interventions that we do, that we provide that connection, the relationships. We need to get people to share tacit and explicit knowledge and use data to get insights and support each other. Let me give you an example of this. This was shared with me on Twitter by David Perks, and he shared this screenshot, and it appears in the book as well, about how the connections can be made between people. Now, he said the biggest change he'd seen during the pandemic was the ability to record, replay, and reuse learning content, something that didn't really happen pre-pandemic. And the live virtual sessions that he has done, though they've gone well, they've been interactive, but what he sees is different culturally, is organizations repackaging them, breaking down the 90-minute recording into micro learning and embedding it via key points shared on internal social media. You see on the screenshot some examples of that. And David has highlighted in the red circles some of the things that stand out to him that he's noticed. This type of learning agility in his clients becoming common practice. And you can see what they're doing there. Now, this is leading us towards communities of practice, self-managed communities of practice. And you're right, Lisa Marie, community management. It's a good example from David Perks as well. Reinforces some of the ways in which we need to repurpose learning for a remote and hybrid work. It's a form of social listening. We should be scanning internal social media channels to look for people asking questions and then use that to build the right intervention. From an L&D perspective, we need to recognize those pain points when learning's needed. Now, most of, if not almost all of those pain points are going to be outside of the live virtual session. There are lots of touch points where we could predict it, maybe a new starter or somebody moving jobs, or where there's a significant change in somebody's jobs. We should be able to anticipate that, create structures and opportunities to connect with other people, to share ideas. For that, we've got to be proactive. We've got to be thinking about how we help those who work remotely to find and use those opportunities, because we know if we do, it helps with all the other aspects of remote working as well, the isolation and the social interactions that people need. We've got to help leaders to be able to do this as well, to create those opportunities too, regardless of whether people are remote or face-to-face, to benefit from learning on the job and working with others. Thank you, David, for sharing that. I think you're right. We need to be the broker, the curator of things. So we've got to be able to spread these learning opportunities round the organization, and we can use leaders to help us do that, because the leaders could be on top of the pre and post live virtual session work, and they can work with the learners on the job to ensure it's embedded into the flow of work. We can create lots of content as well. We could create audio, video content and more that learners can access asynchronously at the point of need, and we can encourage that user-generated content to be created by all workers based on where they think performance needs to be impacted. Question for you: how are you doing this in your organization? Some people have shared examples already, but if you haven't, feel free to throw those into chat. How are you developing communities of practice? How are you moving towards being that curator or broker of learning, as opposed to the single source of the truth or the sage on the stage? Share some of your thoughts in chat, please. As Mark points out, it's a really underestimated quality in the current world of work, but it's one that we need to do far more of. And again, it's a big cultural shift. This one, I think, not as difficult as going into the metaverse, but still is something that we can do using some of the readily available technology like Slack and open communities like Joe says as well. So thank you for all your comments there. Anything you can do is a good start point. So I'm going to share with you another case study that appears in the book. The book's full of case studies like this. This one comes from the CIPD, the professional body for people working in the people profession. And in the book, I researched what they've been doing to change internal L&D. Now, they didn't have many internal L&D specialists when the pandemic hit. They mostly bought it in from outside. Oh, Paul, yes, I have. I'll tell you more about that later on. I do not need an opportunity to tell you a bit more about that. And they found that those external people they brought in to do L&D, there was a bit of a mixed approach about whether the provider was willing and able to repurpose what they were doing for a remote world. And the internal L&D team became very aware that the nature of live sessions meant that those facilitating them, they needed extra skills to flourish. They needed creative design skills. They needed strong facilitation, strong presentation and coaching skills. And the design was something that everybody, internal and external, had to get right. There is a real competition for learners' attention when they're working remotely. So the design has to be fun, engaging, and highly visual. And people need to be able to use all the different tools, not just the software, but the whiteboards, all the different things you need as well. And if the providers couldn't do that, then the CIPD chose not to work with them. They also realized that the learners themselves, the employees at CIPD, they had lots of things to think about and a relatively limited attention span when they're learning online compared to in person. So full day workshops, in contrast to what you saw All Saints do, CIPD went the other way. They went for 1 hour shorter bite-sized sessions spread out over weeks or sometimes months. They selected facilitators who were comfortable with that, who had the mindset to change their solutions and do it slightly different. Now, they developed lots of different programs as well. They felt they had to be ahead of the game, anticipating what their employees would need. Much like we said, multiple touch points, and you can predict where people will need support. It's complicated and it has to be timely, has to address those pain points, but they were able to do it. And that meant using data and insights from engagement tools they already had to identify what people needed to do the job well. This meant people's attitude to learning was changing, and it meant that they could support it with follow-up learning, with lots of different mediums, audio, video, things to read, to meet people's preferences to learn on demand. And that really helped. And they had a platform that they could put all these types of things on. And people could fit learning then better into their work easier, didn't need to take time away from the job to attend it. And the team noticed that people value, much like you've been saying today, the opportunity to connect with people much more than they value the content itself sometimes. So encouraging use of internal social media and chat and other bits of functionality helps people to share ideas, connect with people, and becomes a very flexible form of learning too. And indeed now the preferred way to learn. The CIPD have got a default virtual approach. If you want to do a session face-to-face for CIPD employees, you have to make a business case to justify why you wouldn't do it virtually. And moving forward, they're trying to promote much more asynchronous opportunities for learning and communication to reduce time spent in live virtual sessions and meetings and increase the chance of socializing more. So things like collaborative chats and using voice notes instead of meetings are prevalent in their culture now. And they've designed a lot of learning to support people who are working in a hybrid environment, because the types of things you need are often quite different. So if you want to know more about the CIPD's case study, then that's in my book, and thank you, Dawn, for promoting yours. It shouldn't just be me promoting books today. So there's lots of good stuff that we could talk about, and I'm coming towards the end of my session now. I want to pose some questions for you to reflect upon, to take away from this session, to help you think about some of the things that I think are important. So some questions here. Firstly, why? Why do you want to run live virtual sessions? What problem will that solve for your organization? And you're going to have to raise the skill level of everybody who's involved in this. So how are you going to do that? And what are you going to blend with and around some of these live virtual sessions? And earlier on, we talked about hybrid learning as well, didn't we? And we noted the limitations and also some of the benefits of this. So how are you going to get around some of those things? Don't feel like you need to answer these questions now. These are questions for you to take away. Feel free to take a screenshot of this if it would help you. I've got another slide of questions coming up. So I'm going to move away from this slide in about 5 seconds. If any of you want to get a screen grab or a picture on your device, it's going to go in 3, 2, 1, go. And this is my next set of questions for you. We've got to get senior leaders switched on. So how are you going to do that? We've got to get data and use technology. And how are you going to use those things to create learning solutions and leverage it to best effect? And how are you going to predict those touch points in your organization where people need L&D and be proactive and deliver it at the point of need? This slide's going to stay up for about another 5 seconds if you want to take a screenshot of this or a picture on your device. Again, don't feel like you have to answer these questions. These are things for you to take away. And this will disappear in 3, 2, 1, gone. And that brings me to the end of my session. And I'm not letting you go away without having another glance at my book. My book is due out on the 3rd of June. I'm doing a lot of publicity about it now, lots of sessions like this and other sessions as well. I'd love for you to buy it. Maybe you're interested in some of the things that I've talked about today. I've given you a snippet of just one of the chapters in the book. There's lots more which covers all aspects of the employee life cycle and all the things we need to change and think about if we're going to deliver HR and L&D in a virtual, remote or hybrid setting. And if you do buy it, please let me know. Let me know in advance. I can give you a discount code, so send me a private message on social media. But if you do buy it, when you're reading it, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to be able to answer your questions as you're going through and have conversations with you, either as you're reading it or after, as you try to apply some of the things that are in the book. So I'd love to have conversations with you. Please feel free to get in touch. Time now for questions. So I'm going to hand back over to Mark, who might well have questions for me, but feel free to throw any questions into chat or raise your hand and open your microphone, and we can deal with anything as we go through. Thank you for all your contributions today, by the way. Mark.
Hi, Gary. Thank you so much for that. And goodness me, how much have we packed into that session? And the time has just flown by with some incredible engagement and interaction, questions, comments throughout, book recommendations, podcast recommendations, you name it. So hopefully, for those of you who've joined today, you've got some really meaningful learning and some action points to take away. I know I certainly have. If you have any questions, do feel free to pop them into the chat box. I've got one for you, Gary, just for now. Something I found, and this kind of speaks to a comment Emma made a little while ago about kind of preferences for learning. I think I'm noticing that people tend to, now that there's so many channels that you can communicate through, so it's part of this whole evolution to, within hybrid work, if it was happening pre-pandemic as well, is that it can be a bit overwhelming to sort of get a sense of how am I going to chat to, through which platform, through which tool, and also what do people prefer? And I know I've certainly drifted away from email, and I'm that classic stereotype of I probably respond to emails. If you don't get the response in 3 hours, it might be 3 weeks in my case. But if you send me a message via Twitter or via LinkedIn, you probably get a response much more quickly. So apologies if anyone was waiting a response from me. So how does that work for you, Gary? Do you have any kind of preferences for the way that you like to engage with your clients and your customers and your colleagues? How does that work out for you in this new world?
Yeah, I have a preference, as you do, Mark, and so does everybody else. And you can find your way through that just by trial and error sometimes, but why wouldn't we ask people what their preference is for communication? Why wouldn't we do that? You do that with your family and friends. There's a particular friend that everybody has that will, if you send them a text message, they'll ring you back with their answer. But that tells you what their preference is. And when you know that, you can work around that. And it's the same with all your employees. They already have ways in which they talk to their closest colleagues, and they do that on a particular channel, and we need to go to whatever that channel is. We don't get them to move to our channel, we go there. So that's what I would say. Find out what their preference is and go there. I can see some of the questions going in chat. Lisa Marie asks, am I standing? Yeah, I'm standing. It's the only way I can deliver, Lisa Marie. It's the only way I can do it. By the end of the day, because I'm 46 now, my hips, knees and ankles, they start to complain, but it's the only way I can deliver a live session. And it's also a good recommendation because it gives you full access to your body language and your voice and your lung capacity. So I would always recommend standing for a live virtual session. Paul says what about health and safety? Well, Paul, if you buy my book, there's some thoughts on that about the ergonomic setup for people who are working remotely and the kinds of things we need to think about. And I've also thrown some things in there from a personal trainer perspective about diet and nutrition when working remotely as well, because I don't know about you, but I snack badly when I work remotely. So things to think about there about health and safety. Other questions, let's have a think. Could I share a picture of my office setup? Lisa Marie, I can share with you this bit, because that's been carefully curated. I can't share with you that bit because this is a bedroom. This is my eldest daughter's bedroom. And that bit is very girly and very very much like a teenage girl needs to have their bedroom. So you don't get to see that bit. People only get to see this bit. Everybody's got things to hide, and I'm no different. So I make sure I focus on this bit, but I'm not showing you the wallpaper on that part of the room. Yeah, sitting standing desks are really good, Joe. But even if you can't get one of them, then just a box or a couple of big books underneath your laptop can get you the same effect as well. The desk, I can't show you the desk because my camera's on the desk, but there's plenty of such desks on Amazon that you can buy, and my one cost about £300. It's one of the best things I ever did. Yeah, loads of adjustable things, but even just, you know, boxes and books get you where you need to be. Let's see if there are any other questions. I'm not sure that I can see.
There are lots of messages of thanks coming through, Gary, about the content of the session, and also people thanking their colleagues in the breakout discussion rooms for their sharing and their engagement, which is wonderful to see.
Yeah, it's been great to get so many questions and interactions today as well. It's been really helpful. Biggest mistake I ever made virtually? Oh, I've got so many, Joe. One of the worst things I ever did was trying to deliver a live session to some people who are in South America. And at the time, my youngest child was aged 2, and he was being potty trained. And Mark's just been through this with his youngest child as well, being potty trained. And I hadn't factored that in. And he came and knocked on my door as I was delivering a live session, really loud, telling me that he'd done a poo in his potty. He was very, very proud of this, by the way, as of course you would be, because everybody would be. But he was telling me, shouting through the door. And the people in South America heard him, and they were quite congratulatory to him, to be fair. But they found out earlier than my wife did, and she was in the room downstairs. And sometimes about controlling the environment. And I've now got things I can put underneath the door, and I've got a lock on the door that can stop him coming in. But that was one of the biggest mistakes I made. I've got tons of those, Joe. We could be here all day with my type of mistakes as well. Let's see if there are any other questions, any others type of things. Ooh, yeah, playing a video is another one. Yeah, forgetting to click the share sound one. There's all kinds of things as well. I've had the electric go off as I've been in the middle of the session. I've had all kinds of things go wrong as well. Always forget to unmute. Yeah, I often forget to plug my laptop into the wall as well. And I realise there's about 30 seconds left as well. So loads of problems. No one's perfect. No one is ever perfect as well. How do I cope with not seeing people's faces? Do I have to, good question, Lisa Marie. Well, I don't need to see people's faces in a session. People can have control over their cameras, don't need to see it. But I often try and imagine like they are in the room with me, and that they are right next to me, and that the people I know well, like close family, close friends. That's how I try to deliver sessions in that type of way. I imagine they're there. That can be difficult, because let's say I let loose a joke, and I will often let loose jokes, and I have to imagine that you're rolling on the floor laughing. But I do imagine that you're rolling on the floor laughing. That gets me through. You get used to it. Yeah, lecture to your soft toys. That's a good one, Amanda, as well. So if you've got things like that, place them behind your camera, talk to that. So I could do that as well. So that works. Yeah, interaction, Joe, as well. You don't need to see people. There are other ways of checking people's engagement and presence in the session. Joe talks about this a lot on social media, so follow Joe if you don't already. And there's loads of ways. You don't need to see people's faces. It's a hangover from face-to-face delivery that can dominate the session if you want. Yeah, thank you, Joe, for that. Okay, any other questions before I hand over to Mark for the wrap-up? I don't see any. Please raise your hand if you've got a question, you want to open your mic, or throw that into chat. Obviously, my contact details are on the screen. If you want to have a chat with me after this session, then feel free. I'm not hard to track down. But I'm going to hand back over to Mark now for the wrap up of the session. Thank you for all the interactions that you've given today.
Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you for sharing so much about your own personal journey as well through this. And I know that much of that will be captured in the book too. There is a book coming out. I don't think you mentioned it that much, but I know that there is one coming later on this year. And very best of luck with the launch. I can't wait to pick up a copy. For those of you who are joining who don't know anything about TMSDI, we'd love to hear from you again. We offer webinars, accreditation training, and also profile solutions for people who work in the world of L&D and HR. So if you're interested in finding out more about us, you can go over to tmsdi.com, where you'll find case studies, information on special offers, as well as a little bit more about how we work as a business and why we're so very fortunate that we have people with whom we've been working for over 20 years, such as Gary. We consider ourselves incredibly lucky that we've got an incredibly generous, experienced, and fun network globally that we support every day. In the meantime, all that is left for me to say is a very big thank you to all of you for showing up with all of your questions and your energy and your engagement. I know we've not been able to see you for all of this time, but I've certainly felt all of that throughout the session with the ongoing back channels of chat, comments and queries and questions all the way through. It's been really wonderful having you with us, and we very much look forward to seeing you next time we have a session like this. If you want to find out any more about Gary, I know he's left all of his social channels on the previous slide, but his website's there on screen, epichr.co.uk. And look at that, almost bang on time. I'd like to wish you all a very wonderful, happy and sun-soaked weekend, fingers crossed, and we'll see you next time. All the best. Take care.
Everyone.